Hey everyone. Let's let's get into the origin of the species, section 4 of an Ascension Handbook by Tony Stubbs, channeled by Sarah Pess. Um, I just want to go back over a couple of things. We seen in the last segment that you collectively pulled off a brave experiment to see just how far from the source you could go. It just, that's the experiment right there. That's why we're here. To see just how far from source we can travel without diminishing that light. So the rest of the book is going to get very interesting. There's a lot of tools in here to use for day-to-day life and for realigning your chakras and getting those frequencies lined up so that you can get your spirit self, the energy of it, to manifest itself here through your three-dimensional being. It's this life-changing knowledge, life-changing information. We are talking about things that, yeah, just life-changing. That's probably the best way to put it. It's, I don't want to waste too much time. Let's go ahead and get into this. I said earlier, and this is probably the most important statement in this book, that your true nature is spirit. The you that you think of as you is just one of many projected across time and in various places on this and other planets in the universe, in universes you haven't discovered yet. Now, this in no way belittles who you perceive yourself to be. On the contrary, you are a vast, multidimensional being, a magnificent expression of the source, which you brilliantly and lovingly crafted to perform your spirit function. Nowhere on any planet in any universe has such a creation as you existed. And just knowing that you are part of a much larger enterprise can immeasurably increase the sense of your life's meaningfulness. As this truly awesome being, you decided that for a very special purpose you would incarnate on this planet at this exciting time in its history. The result of that is, of course, the you of which you are aware never takes for granted the brilliant pinpoint of consciousness focused in the here and now that you are. If you had any idea of the process by which you existed, you would be in awe of your own power. Your own power. Not just the power of Source, but the power that Source imparted into you to actually carry this out. So please try to see yourself as spirit having a human experience and not the other way around. You may ask, if I really am this vast being, how come I don't know about it or sense it in some way? Well, just stop reading for a moment and try to sense your larger self as a force, supreme and unstoppable, impelling itself into three-dimensional reality as a huge energy wedge. With you as the leading edge, try to sense the massive energetic force behind you, somewhat out of focus to your mind, but crystallizing into perfect clarity of body, emotions, and mind exactly where you are sitting now. If you don't sense it, then imagine it, and your spirit self will backfill your imagination with pictures, feelings, or just plain knowing. This is in parentheses. It does it all the time anyway, into parentheses. And please don't just believe this. Belief is sudden death to your search for the truth. Once you believe, you stop looking. If you are skeptical, good. Keep looking until you finally meet your true self. You are there, waiting for you. But back to the question, how come I don't know about this spirit self that's supposed to be me? This needs a little background. A long time ago, before history as you perceive it, a number of non-physical beings, each a vast entity in its own right, decided to colonize a planet to undertake some research on behalf of the source. One of you volunteered to serve as the consciousness of the planet. The group helped this being to systematically densify its energy down through the dimensions. Meanwhile, the rest of you were conceiving the blueprints for the various life forms that would occupy the planet, to be chemically encoded with what you call DNA, and by successive step downs in frequency over eons of time, the planetary consciousness burst through an energy barrier into the solid form you know today as planet Earth. Over vast periods of your elapsed time, these beings continued to create lower frequency projections of themselves, still nowhere near physical yet. Slowly, these projections experimented with even lower frequency forms of themselves to produce what those with psychic vision would call fifth dimensional and fourth dimensional astral forms. Again, slowly over eons, you, as one of these beings, experimented further with DNA, directing energy to intensify more into standing waves of energy to form semi-visible light bodies. Finally, in a brilliant act of creativity, you burst through the dimensional barrier to create the physical structures of subatomic particles, atoms, and molecules within standing wave envelopes that you also conceived. You could still dissolve these forms at will and project different ones, so you played for immeasurable periods at no time identifying with your increasingly physical projections. So even though you were projecting these physical bodies, you still didn't identify with a body. You still identified as spirit. You just weren't quite into the physical third dimension yet. We hadn't severed that link. The ego has not come about yet. The ego is what severs you. The ego runs this body, runs the mind, takes over everything. And that's why the spirit isn't driving. The carnal flesh is driving. Move over, fool. I want to take the wheel. So, you knew that these ethereal bodies were just energy fields that you created and into which you radiated energy for the fun of it. As you pushed further, these projected forms became more visible, as you would use the term. But there was as yet no one consensus shape. You might appreciate the playful nature of the source, always pushing to be creative and to know itself through what it can do. This is getting to who we are. In order to experiment further, you took a bold step. You projected your consciousness into these forms. This allowed you to interact with yourselves in wholly new ways. Impossible at the higher frequencies sorry about that. This allowed you to interact with yourselves in wholly new ways. Impossible at the higher frequencies where you knew only unity. You allowed your consciousness to reside in these ever-densifying physical forms for longer periods of time. Consensus now had two vantage points, fifth dimensional and physical, and you were fully aware in each form of yourselves in the other form, but there was no perception of separateness between them. Now this big party of self-exploration was great fun. New types of energy fields were tried. For example, you established different fields in order to explore thoughts and emotions separately. And most important, you gave your projections almost an autonomy. So they were driving. a freedom to be standalone entities in their own right. This split into two simultaneous vantage points. This split into two simultaneous vantage points was the crucial turning point in history. By now, history has rolled on to just a few 100,000 years ago. The consciousness in each of these autonomous forms was still fully aware of its spirit nature, and separateness was not even a conceivable thought form. The mental construct just does not exist at this point. The planet was literally your biblical Garden of Eden. I've said that for a while, that the whole planet was the garden. It wasn't just regulated to some spot over in the Middle East between the Jordan and the Tigris. That might have been just the last part of the Eden that was left. But it's the whole earth was the garden. And then you have the astrological standpoint of the Abzu. When you look up into the sky, that you can see everything as a reflection from earth to the heavens, to the astral planes, to everything just reflects from somewhere else. So, sorry, I totally just lost my place. Let's start back with the consciousness in each of these autonomous forms was still fully aware of its spirit nature, and separateness was not even a conceivable thought form. The mental construct did not exist. At this point, the planet was literally your biblical Garden of Eden. The concept of death was not even possible, because if you got bored with one physical form, you simply dematerialized it, rolled your consciousness back up into your fifth dimensional frequency, and projected another form. Along the way, you switched from energy projection to a physical birth process and decided on a basic body shape for the species, rapidly densifying physical form. Your legends are full of ancient memories of some of the variety of shapes predating this standardization. Over thousands of years, you as spirits slowly became fascinated with the intensity of the sensations possible. And these now physical forms and your emotional and mental fields became more centered in the lower fields rather than the spirit field. The intensity and richness of emotional experience was totally enthralling, and the sensations that came from being in a dense form were very seductive. You know the story from here, the birth of the ego. You initially intended that the outer ego self would act as the information gathering interface with the physical plane on behalf of your spirit-oriented self, which would continue to make decisions about what was real and what to do in the moment. As the experiment proceeded over the millennia, the outward-looking ego began to form its own ideas about reality, and to refer back to the inward-looking spirit self less and less. The outer ego became stronger, and its identity began to shift from inner states to outer states of being. As a result of this shift, the ego began to color what is perceived and to judge it good or bad according to physical sensation. Thus, the inward-looking self began to be fed pre-digested information. The ego's emotional and mental sensitivity to the energy of the spirit field waned as the energy of the physical field became more the focal point. The once simultaneous dual vantage points became separate points of consciousness, and the lower frequency, physically oriented vantage point lost sight of the spiritual one. Over the next few millennia, the perceptive gap widened to the point that the lower vantage point began to either doubt the existence of the higher one or to project it outside of itself. That's why we have gods in ancient mythology, because we decided that everything was outward, not inward. But I'm here to tell you, everything is inward. not outward. It's eisegesis, not exegesis. So it's everything correlates in from out there to in there. As above, so below. As within, so without. And as without, so within. It's true both ways. So don't be looking out there for God. Don't be looking out there for your higher self. Be looking in here for your higher self. Be looking in here for the source. Just wanted to point that out to everyone. I'm sure if you're watching this, you'd probably already know that. Gosh, I hate it when I do that. I always lose my place. As a result of this shift, the ego began to color. Okay, so the ego's emotional, mental sensitivity to energy of the spirit field waned. Okay, we got that. Over the next few millennia, the perceptive gap widened to the point that the lower vantage point began to either doubt the existence. Gosh, we've already read that. Thus, you split your perception of who you were, and the concept of gods was created as mankind. As mankind could no longer relate to the vast multidimensional beings as part of itself. The only way to reconcile with the inner voices, the impulses from spirit, and the memory of being far more than a limited human being was to project your vast, powerful, and all-loving natures out onto beings that you as a species created for the purpose. You continued to receive messages and feel love from your inner spirit selves, but ascribe them as coming from your external gods. Just talking about that, but so we created animals and plants and trees and flowers. We created everything else on this earth to be an expression of our love for them, to externally express love instead of inwardly expressing love for source and higher self and so on and so forth. So that's why we love our dogs and our cats and snakes and whatnot. Everybody loves their favorite animal, right? So to finally drive in the wedge between spirit and personality, you conceived of a brilliant veil, shame. By building the vibration of shame into the very cells of your body, you finally achieved a complete sense of separation and the spirit being you once knew yourself to be became a phantom memory, easily dispelled by the harsh light of your new reality. You then perceived of yourself as a personality, not even knowing that you were cut off from the spirit, because you'd forgotten about ever having been a unity. You externalized the vast heroic part of yourself into a deity that you created. Such a shame. And the shame ensured that you saw yourself as unworthy in the eyes of this fabricated deity. So over time you became separate, isolated in a bag of skin, looking out at a universe you no longer understood. Trapped in time and space, with death as the only way out. All you had to help you figure it out was a set of learned responses called a personality. Please remember that you planned all of this from the beginning. You, as one of the group of beings that designed this experiment, had decided to see how far you could separate your perceptions from your nature, pure spirit. Enormous ingenuity was required to design and create the veils that were to separate the dimensions so that you would incarnate with no memory of who you really were. As part of this veiling, your collective spirit functions made a decision that was to affect every incarnation for the next 200,000 years and completely alter the nature, purpose, and content of human life on this planet. You invented karma. Karma is a really interesting subject, and I'm sure everybody has checked out karma. And so we understand karma is if X affects the life of Y, then the act must be reciprocated in equal opposite reaction from Y back to X. So if I do good to someone else, then the good comes back to me. If I do bad to someone else, then the bad comes back to me. And, you know, sometimes you can do good to someone and bad still comes back, but it could be karma from a past life. It could be something, you know, you have to think of it as a wide range of karma from hundreds of past lives that you've lived. So, you know, you could be doing all the right things in this life and still get the shaft. But only it's the way I understand it is that it could be from one of your past lives or the life that you had just recently lived, that you were just waking from. You came into this world and you did all the right things in this world, but that life you did all the wrong things. So you're getting the shaft a lot, and you feel like it's unfair and that the universe is totally aligned against you. Try to look at it from a different perspective, that maybe your past life was just full of hate and anger and living in lower vibrations, and you're just kind of paying for it. I feel like that sometimes, but I'm coming to find that that's karma. So in the next section, we'll go through karma and get a real good look for it. We'll get a real good description of what karma is and why it came about. Thank you all for watching, and bless you, and peace be upon you.